So for those involved in more advanced structuring in terms of wealth planning, tax planning, and so on, it's important to understand the network of European territories and dependencies. So this is the first in a series of videos where we'll take a deeper dive into European dependencies and territories around the world. As we take a deeper dive into European territories and dependencies overseas, can you talk to us a bit about Norwegian territories and dependencies and the planning opportunities that may be available?
Yeah. So Norway's got 5 dependencies and territories, 3 dependencies and 2 territories. Remember, territory is part of the sovereignty,
Yes.
and dependencies are not. But the 3
Right.
dependencies of Norway in Norwegian is called Biland, B-I-L-A-N-D. And then you've got the 2 territories of Jan Mayen, which was a Dutch island for 400 years, and then they gave it to Norway. And then you've got Svalbard. That's the permanently inhabited island, okay? So that is a mixture of a dependency and the territory because it's integral part of Norway and the sovereignty of Norway, but there are 9 different areas that they are self-autonomous. Usually you're entirely self-autonomous or not autonomous. And here it's 9 areas. And that was from the Treaty of Svalbard in 1925, which gave the sovereignty of Svalbard to Norway. But what's important for tax planning is, I mean, the 9 areas are immigration and fishing and environment and mining, but the one that's obviously of importance is tax. So it's tax autonomous, and they only have to collect enough tax to pay for themselves, considering that Norway also gives them a couple of $100 million per year. So they don't have to have high taxes. So the tax rate for individuals is 6 to 8%, and for companies it's 16 instead of up to 78% in Norway for oil companies, etc. Some people have tried, some Norwegians, the biggest oil people, tried to set up a company in Svalbard and divert profits there, and they only had 2 people there, and they were taken to the cleaners by Norway and had to retroactively pay hundreds of millions. So a company there must do business there, like dog sledding or hotels or research. But where it becomes interesting, Norway doesn't recognize trust. It's like Spain. If you're going to trust, they just look through it. You pay. We don't recognize the legal benefit and all that. Okay, that's a split. Norway was under pressure from the EU because Norway's not part of the EU, but they're part of the EEA, and therefore are under pressure directly from the EU. And the EU was saying, you must register all the companies there and trusts, but they don't recognize trusts. So what they did was they came out with AML KYC law as recently as the end of November 2024. So it's really only a few weeks old. And it says quite clearly, Norwegian citizens or residents can be trustees of foreign trusts, which is amazing that they allow that, but they only have to register the trust, the foreign trust, if they're operational in Norway. And then they define what is operational. Operational is you've undergone KYC AML with a Norwegian financial institution. Generally, you can take that as a bank. If you're trying to open a bank account, even though you don't go ahead, that is being operational, and therefore the Norwegian would have to register the trust, or if it owns real estate. Now, these 2 conditions are pretty much the same as a non-UK trust. You would have to register if you own land, if you earn income, and if you deal with one of the 15 relevant persons, one of them being a financial institution. And this law, there's quite a lot of countries around the world I've seen. If you are dealing with a financial institution, you must register the foreign trust. So the planning comes into effect when you use a Svalbard trustee for, let's say, a UK trust. Now, the difference with Svalbard and everything else in the whole world, which is why I've left this to the end, Svalbard is the only jurisdiction in the world that is explicitly excluded in the OECD MCAA, because the MCAA says any country can name a territory that is excluded. And the only one that took that up was Norway. and it's not part of any double taxation agreement. In fact, every double taxation agreement between Norway and any country, you can look it up randomly. China, Japan, France, go look it up. And very quickly on page 2, it'll say the definition of Norway excludes Svalbard. If you look at the US or Canada tax treaties, and those go back to the 70s, it says the definition of Norway excludes Spitsbergen. But Spitsbergen is the old name for Svalbard before the 1925 treaty. Funny enough, today the largest island of Svalbard is called Spitsbergen, the one where the big cities, the two big towns are big, 2,500 people, and the Russian-owned one called Barentsburg. So if you're explicitly excluded, there's no interpretation, and you can do a whole lot of tax planning regarding that exclusion, okay, and that I discuss in my seminars.
Okay, great. And for those who want to find out more about your seminars, is there a website that they can go to?
I don't host them myself. A Swiss firm called Academy and Finance. You just go there, and then you'll see March, April, May, June, a few different seminars I'm presenting. The one that's interesting here regarding here is the one Overlooked European Territories for Tax Planning and Wealth Management.
Okay, fantastic. And these Norwegian territories, dependencies, have you been to them personally? And any of them, of the 5 of them?
Yes, I set up the trustee there, so we rented an apartment. The immigration is very interesting. Okay, so Svalbard is not part of the EU or the EEA or NATO. It's not part of Schengen. So when you fly there, you get stamped out of the EU, either with the once-a-week flight from Oslo or the daily flight that goes via Tromsø. You get off the airplane, they stamp you out the EU, you get back on the airplane. But when you arrive in Svalbard, there's no immigration to meet you, because the immigration law, which is one of the 9 areas they've got their own rights to, is any country in the whole world, whether you're Russian or North Korean or whatever, you can go visit there. Obviously, you've got to be able to go through Norway to get there. There used to be direct flights from Russia, but that they stopped since the war. But if you are a citizen, not resident, citizen of one of the 48 countries that signed the agreement recognizing Norway having sovereignty. So it took quite a few years. In 1925, 24 countries signed, but over the next 20 years, another 20 countries signed. Even Korea signed. And then when they split up, it was North Korea and South Korea. So Kim Il-jung signed in 2016 that he's allowed to go live there. So not only if you're one of these 48 countries, you can go live there, you can exploit the mining, the fishing, etc. That's why Russia is still there today, very, very much so. Okay, so people get mixed up. Anybody can go live there. No, you've got to be one of the 48 countries. So, for instance, Yugoslavia was one of the 48 countries that signed, but Yugoslavia split up in, when was it, the 80s, into 6 different members, and each one over the next 10 years re-signed the agreement. So Bosnia, Montenegro, Serbia, etc. So it's back to the equivalent of the 48 countries that have signed that agreement. And no country signed the agreement and then split up and didn't sign the agreement. Of course, they all signed it. But they're not part of NATO as well, that the Russians were sure. Interesting thing. So with all this low tax and not part of exchange of information, did any country blacklist Svalbard? And the only country in the whole world, there used to be 2 until a few years ago. It was Portugal and Ecuador. But Ecuador, for some reason, took them off the blacklist. I suppose because they're part of Norway, you know, it's prestigious. But it's Portugal that keeps it on the blacklist. But Portugal blacklists places like Isle of Man, etc.
The most comprehensive blacklist I've seen anywhere in the world. Basically, any island, anywhere sunny, anywhere that's an island, they just add it to the list.
Which takes away the credibility of their blacklist, I think. Yeah. But the good thing about so the overseas territories I mentioned, they're prestigious. They've got the same governor, the same laws as the monarch is their head. There's no difference in the laws between St. Helena and Cayman Islands, okay? So to me, if banks open up companies for St. Helena, there's none of the stigma of a tax haven. And similarly for Svalbard, it's under the sovereignty of Norway. In fact, the address is Svalbard, Norway. It's got the postal address. It's got the telephone number of Norway. And banks will gladly accept structures that are there, okay? So trusts are not taxed, trusts are not registered, and then there's lots more you can do regarding underlying companies. And we'll get to another question about British companies just now.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for sharing your incredible insight. What's the best way for someone to find you, to reach out to you, to get in contact?
My website, co-ownershiptrust.com, and then you'll find 850 articles.